Hi, Tamatua. I hope I didn't pronounce your name wrong or incorrectly. My name is Jeff Allen, and I just saw your post up on LinkedIn about attending the AMTA conference in Chicago for 2024. It was recently here, and it really hits home with me what you're saying because I have worked on, if you just look at my background, I've worked on a number of different machine translation systems and different approaches, and both for major international languages and a lot of low data languages or low resource languages, what you want to call these things. And I've had a lot of publications about it, lots of conference papers, lots of business magazine articles, and other publications, and even some book chapters about the challenges that are going through this, and mainly for low data languages, because that's always been something I've wanted to focus on. My master's and my doctorate degrees are on the Creole languages of the Caribbean, so that was kind of a natural thing. Though I have lived in France and Europe for most of my life, so I have worked also on the major international languages, right? So I've worked in LSPs. I worked for TransPerfect and Translation.com on selling projects and director sales, but also on some of the MT attempts at it, a long time ago, at least for that. But worked in some of the other institutes and major providers of MT systems. So and on the buyer side as well as on the provider side. So I've been through this. And understand a lot of your questions and concerns. Uh, Given that you're coming from, I mean, I haven't looked up I should have looked up your company, right, and looked it up, but all you said was that you're an LSP, a small SB specialized in Pacific Island languages, and that's really all I needed to know, right? Which tells me a lot. Your niche on the certain languages, and there are a number of languages of the Pacific Islands, but then what are the ones that are going to be the highest needed? That's kind of depends on the the needs that are coming in for you. So there are. I'll say that the things that you need to 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 know here, because you're coming in at like the tail end of where we are now, rather than looking at where we come from and what are the different types of approaches, types of engines, types of things, and the purposes that go for what you're doing and what you want to do with it, right? So, well, I'd say the first thing I've got a number of papers and articles, conference talks, and some videos on inbound versus outbound translation. That's the first thing I think you want to start with is what's your purpose, and inbound or inward just means that you're doing content gisting, right? And that you want to it has a high tolerance of error because it's a lot for usually internal things or journalistic, kind of journalistic based content, or newspapers and stuff. It's usually general purpose, and uh, and it's used to just understand content, right? And then what you do with it afterwards is your choice as an individual, what that's going to serve your purpose, why you want to use it. So we all do this all day, right? We all do. Everyone does this. We understand things in another language. I want to understand that article, some language I don't know, and I'm going to content gist it, inbound, inward translate it, and then I'm going to use that information when I want, right? And I'll accept. I have a high tolerance of error. Okay. The other type of approach is called outbound or outward, and I call it usually translation for publication to understand. And that's where you want to produce a translation to sell, right? And that's what you're doing, right? So you might be doing some of the content gisting kind of approaches with draft translations. If you're doing that, do those. Not everybody wants to do draft translation, but sometimes we have to, or sometimes you do as a step to get to a higher quality translation for publication, higher quality version. So just that point right there helps determine what kind of system you're going to get, right? So the inbound type stuff is what you get up on Google Translate, Microsoft Translator, any of these, Facebook and all these different translation systems that are online for free, the freebie versions, is for inbound, right? Inward, and it's got general audience, general translation, lots of different fields, but not too specific, right? Now, the translation for publication approach, the outbound approach, is where you're going to be, because you're doing the translation for high quality, they're going to be more customized approaches, a lot more tweaking, and that customization can be done in different ways. And I'll get into that in a second here. And that will be to help usually some kind of machine assisted human translation, to help as a productivity booster, to help you translate content, right? That you're going to publish and usually sell. So that's what you're doing, right? So those are a couple factors taken to that factor there. Those two things, and what the types of content you're doing, right? So as a translation agency, an LSP, you're going to be they're kind of two general approaches that, well, are you focused on niche domains or a certain type of language? And it looks like you're doing languages, right? The language that you're focusing on. Then you're probably getting a lot of different requests for those languages. Whereas other companies will say that they're going to focus on life sciences, LSPs that will work in life sciences, and then they've got a number of different areas, right? And then you can even specialize in pharmaceutical and medical devices and clinical trials, all that. Or you can specialize in telecommunications, or you can specialize in hospitality and tourism. I mean, I've sold these, right? So I worked as a business development director at TransPerfect and Translation.com, so I know this, right? And those, and even in that, and some of them are good in sports and entertainment, right? And those are specialized domains. So it depends on what your need is, right? And I think that you're on the first one, you've got to deal with probably whatever kind of content you're going to get for those languages that you're working on. And you may be specialized in some domains, but you're going to be open to taking content and accepting that request, for whatever you're going to get for those languages. But preferring, some specialized areas if you can. But the other LSPs are going to focus really on, I could tell you which ones specialize in certain fields, right? Certain sectors. So now you want to take those factors and take into account that there are different types of machine translation approaches or engine approaches. I'll give kind of a quick overview of that. I mean, all these things I'm doing here, I'm doing a quick overview of what I've made different videos and different publications on over the years. So I'm trying to cover a lot of different things in one video, right? So one explanation. So the next thing you want to look at is, and which is coming to your comment here on, the LLM approach probably isn't good for low data languages, or it might be good, but not MNT, right? So, but the low data in general won't be for LLM. And the reason for that, and I've mentioned this many times too, or not just with LLMs, but in the early days of MT, let's say, I'm going to say not the earliest days, but starting I think in the 2000s, we started making distinctions between these a little bit more. And because we started having, really in the 1980s, translation memories came out, right? And so those are kind of a sexy name for translation memory, right? So, or translation memory is a sexy name for example-based machine translation. But before that, they were all rule-based machine translation. The rule-based tends to be rules, grammar rules. If each of the two languages you're dealing with, you combine those and you code them in, and then you have dictionaries of different types. General dictionary, kind of a general specialized dictionary, and then you have specialized dictionaries. You put them in order, and you kind of group them and put a ranking priority of how these different custom dictionaries down to even specific corporate vocabulary. So you kind of have these. You're choosing the dictionaries. You start with a general one, and then you use your custom ones where you want to get it to fine tune for the type of content you're working with, right? So that might be a specific corporation, specific domain, a subdomain, or whatever. And any of your TMs, your translation memories, you're going to rank them depending on how for a number of different factors. So the rule-based ones were usually principal one, and then we came out with the translation memories, in the 1980s onward, and those became databases or corpora, what do you want to call them. And we moved into statistical machine translation. There was research done on it, and I was working in systems on it's the SPT kind of approach, statistic based, in the 1990s. But that really came out in about 2010ish, I'll say, as commercial. I mean, there was some language weavers doing a little bit earlier, but 2003ish. But when it became kind of out where it was available and people started using it, about 2010, and then the whole NMT kind of arrived in about 2015. I'm kind of generalizing here. There were some others who did research, industrial research, and all that, but where it's getting available, it was sold. And then Neural came out in about 2015, and that kind of was a beginning of a game changer. But the errors were different, and it was very fluid. But the errors were harder to identify because it was very fluent text. And the statistic base, I don't want to go into how this is all done, but statistics base is basically done on trigrams and doing probability based matching, whereas example based was done on linguistic factors and actual words, right? And so was the rule based was actually combining specific words and combining them and creating all your combining your grammar rules with the dictionary to create words, right? So and the LLMs now, as we're looking at it, it's really corpus based. It's huge corpus based, and your large language models. You got to have you got to get huge amounts of data that are not usually compatible with low data languages or low resource languages, and this has always been an issue. And what's happened in the past is, I was working in Korean. And some Korean languages in Serbo-Croatian back at Carnegie Mellon in the 1990s. And we had to create our own databases because we just didn't have them. And we did it in a certain way, and it's all been written up in conference papers at LREC and others. We explained how we did it. And we were able to do it in an intelligent way to kind of build that database up for the purpose that we needed in 17 different domains, right? So we were using them we're using Newswire mainly, but we had other things too. And I don't want to go all the details because I've got videos and papers that explain this, right? But the approach, you really have to determine what you want to do with it, right? And I've just given you a kind of an overview of a lot of different factors that you need to take into consideration for your purpose, right, of what you want to do with it. So, yeah, and you can do like draft, right? So if you're doing drafts and then doing higher quality, if you do that kind of step process, which some people do, then you can use certain approaches. But the mistake I've seen usually that's caused failures in implementing machine translation is usually you want to use a content gisting approach, an inward bound translation approach. And then you want to apply it to an outward translation for publication approach. And it doesn't work without a lot of error and a lot of work because they're not made to do the same thing. And the failures I've seen have usually been that. You're trying to repurpose something for a tool for another purpose, right? Like it's always using, the whole kind of joke of using a hammer to be able to do something for another tool, right? A hammer and a wrench are two different tools, and you don't want to be using one to do something else. When you try to do it, it can try to work, but it doesn't work as good, right? It just doesn't work as well. And you might do some damage. So a lot of the things I've seen in experimental work and even in attempting to do it, and the time that took and the waste of time was because taking one approach and trying to apply it to another. And the same goes the other direction too. If you take take an approach that's for an outbound, outward translation publication, and try to use it for content gisting, it's not going to be as good because it's too specialized, right? And so it'll miss a lot of the larger corpora that you got for usually newswire, journal articles, journals, newspapers, that kind of stuff, and radio broadcasts and TV broadcasts, and all these things, which are more general purpose, right? They're not so specialized in general. That kind of depends. And so these are the concerns. These are the things you want to look and focus on, think about as you're looking. And what I've sometimes said is that is use if you're going to start from scratch and you don't have much data, use try to create or reuse, or like use an open logos. There are some role-based systems that you can do. Use that and create one, right? And do it from scratch. And it takes time, but at least it's going to fit your need, right? It's going to fit where your need is. And if you look at a lot of the successful stories of customer testimonies that have been documented in a number of conferences going back, it's usually part of a specific purpose, right? It's not always been these general purpose things. It's been very specific. Like I worked at Caterpillar, right? Big machines. So we had to customize our terminology, and we used a very specific system, a knowledge-based system. And we were able to get and we had translation memories. We built our own translation memory system, a TM internal tool, and we customized it and it worked pretty well because we had 17 different types of machines, or types of like groups of machines, families of machines, and then the machines in that, right? And machines and motors. So that's very specific. When we had 1 million words of terminology, we stripped it down to 50,000 and then gradually increased it. And did all the translation of all those terms in each of the languages that we were working on. And that was a pretty successful implementation. Though it was using controlled language, and I want to go into the details of that, and that wasn't so great, but because it was what we had at the time. But it was so specific that it was easier to focus on that field, that sector, that individual domain and subdomains. And I don't think that you need to worry about, for what you're doing, right, for Pacific Island languages and as small as B, you don't want to be trying to use a general purpose translation system, whatever it may be, because that's not going to help you in so much in a kind of a machine-assisted human translation approach, doing decent quality. I don't want to say high quality, but decent quality, fitting the needs of the purpose of what your client is asking for, right? And it all comes down to that, what your client is asking for, right? That's where I think this is always kind of a subjective thing to do. And I've got a whole new video series on quality estimation based on customer needs, right, in sales, and customer experience. So this is even another approach. It's not a technical one, right? So I'm trying to cover a lot of different things here. It's a 20-minute video. I'm sorry, and I've done this twice because I just want to see how fast I can do it faster. But really, I'm trying to cover what is done in hundreds and hundreds of articles, and in at least my publications plus others, right? And this, and you've got. I'm trying to cover it in a way, in an approach you can kind of look through it and walk through, and contact me. Like I've got sometimes publications, I get them in a certain order that to have people read to get familiar with it. But you're right. This is something that is not light to consider. It's hard for low data languages. It's getting better. We're doing better. We're doing more. We're getting better at it. We've come a long ways. Even in 15 years, when I talked at Microsoft, I go up and look at my Microsoft research lecture. I was invited Microsoft to talk about how we put Haitian Creole into Microsoft Translator in 5 days, right? And in production. And that went again to Google a week later and stuff. And how we did it with what I had already done before. And that was the first exotic, first low data language that we ever put into any of these online translation systems. because we already done it and it wasn't known. But these languages that you got to start from scratch, right? Or finding the resources, and you can't use the copyrighted books and training materials and education materials, right? So it's kind of there are lots of things that get into this, a lot of the legal aspects too, on top of the technical. So I'm trying to cover a lot of things here, but I want to get you on a certain thing. So reach out to me, and I'll willing to point you in some directions here, um, and, and knowing it from your perspective as an LSP, right? Not as a research center, not as you've got to make money, right? You've got to make money on the language that you're doing and on the types of purpose of content you're doing, right? You're not trying to just you're not trying to boil the ocean, right? And do everything and do a general purpose. You're trying to do it for certain languages and for certain types of content that are coming in on demand, right? And then you might have some specific. You might have repeat business customers, which might come with certain types of content. That's the same thing. Sometimes you might have to repurpose content, and that it all depends, right? I've been there, so I know what your needs are. So just reach out, and I got a lot of. I know I've got my own publication. I've got the things I cite others to, and what has been done. Um, a lot. This has been discussed and hashed out many, 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 many times by many people. We're getting better at it, and we're finding that it's not. There's lots of people that have done this in different ways. And, even like Asian Online, or it's not called Omniscient, they translated Wikipedia, right, to start, and because they need to start with content for Thai language. So there's lots of different ways that have been done, and it's good to benefit from the lessons learned, right? But it's tough for the low data. It's good, and we're getting better with it. So reach out if you need to talk more. Okay, take care. Bye.